Those on whom it is exercised could remain in the shade. They received light only from that portion of power that was conceded to them, or from the reflection of that for a moment they carried disciplinary power. On the other hand, it's exercised through its invisibility. At the same time, it's imposed on those whom it subjected the principle of compulsory visibility. In discipline, it is subject to have to be seen. This visibility assures that hold of power that's exercised over them. It is fact of being constantly seen, of being able always to be seen, that maintains the disciplines individuals in his subjection, and the examination is the technique by which power, instead of emitting the sign of its potency, instead of imposing its mark on the subjects, holds them in mechanism of objectification. In this space of domination, disciplinary power manifests its potency essentially by arranging objects. The examination, it is, as it were, the ceremony of this objectification. Hitherto rules of political ceremony had been give rise to excessive yet regulated manifestation of power. It was a spectacular expression of potency and expenditure, exaggerated and coded, in which power renewed its vigor. It was also always more or less related to the trump. Solemn appearance of the sovereign brought with it something of conception and coronation, the return from victory. When the funeral ceremony took place with all spectacle power deployed, discipline, however, had its own type of ceremony. It was not trump, but the review, the parade, and the ostentatious form of examination. In it, the subjects were presented as objects to observation of power that was manifested only by its gates. They didn't receive directly an image of sovereign power. They only felt its effect and reflect, as it were, on their bodies, which had become precisely legible and docile. In 15 March 1766, 14 Louis took his first military review. 18,000 men, one of the most spectacular actions of the reign, which was supposed to have kept all Europe in disquiet. Several years later, a medal was struck to commemorate the event. It bears exurge on the right, the king, right foot forward, commanded to exercise itself with the stick. On the left, several ranks of soldiers are shown full face and aligned. The depth they have raised their right arms to shoulder height and are holding their rifles exactly vertical. Their right legs are slightly forward and their left feet turned outward. On the ground, line intersect and right angles to form beneath soldiers' feet broad rectangles that serve as a reference for different space and position of exercise. In the background is a piece of classical architecture. The columns of a palace extend those formed by ranks of men, and the erect roofs, just like having no doubts, extend to lines of exercise. But above the balustrade that crown the building are states representing dancing figure, sinuous lines, rounded gestures, draperies. The marble is covered with movements whose principle of unity harmonic. The men, on the other hand, are frozen into the uniformly repeated attitude of ranks and lines. And tactical unity. The order of architecture which frees its seam, submit the figure of dance, impose its rulers and its geometry on the disciplined man on the ground. The columns of power, very good. Grand Duke Michael was remarked of the regiment, after having kept for 1 hour presenting army, only they breathed. Let's take the medal as evidence the moment when the paradoxically but significantly most brilliant figure of sovereign power is joined to emergence of ritual proper to disciplinary power. The scarcely sustainably visibility of monarch is turned into the unavoidable visibility of subjects, and it is this intervention of invisibility in the functioning of discipline that was to assure exercise of power in its lowest manifestation. We are entering the age of infinite examination and compulsory objectification. Two, the examination also introduces individuality into the field of documentation. The examination leaves behind it a whole meticulous archive constituted in terms of bodies and days. The examination that places individuals in the field of surveillance also situates them in a network of writing. It injects them in a whole mass of documents that capture and fix them. The procedure of examination were accompanied at the same time by the system of intense registration and of documentary accumulation. A power of writing was constituted as an essential part in the mechanism of discipline. On many points, it was modeled on the traditional methods of administrative documentation, though with particular techniques and important innovations. Some concerned methods of identification, signaling, or description. This was the problem in army, where it was necessary to track down deserters, avoid repeating enrollment, correct fictitious information presented by officers, know those errors and values of each individual established with certainty and balance sheet of those who had disappeared or died. It was a problem of hospitals where it was necessary to recognize that the patients expel shamers, follow the evolution of disease, study of effectiveness of treatment, map similar cases, and the beginning of epidemics. It was the problem of teaching establishments where one had to define aptitude. Each individual situate his level and his abilities, indicate the possible use that might be made of them. The register enables one by being available in time and place to know habits of children, their progress in PT, in catechism, in letters, during the time they have been at the school. Hence the formation of whole series of codes of discipline and individuality that made it possible to transcribe by means homogenization individual features established by examination. The physical code of signaling, medical code of symptoms, the educational or military code of conduct or performance. These codes were still very crude, both in quality and quantity, but they marked as first stage in formulation of individual within power relations. The other innovations of disciplinary writing concerned the correlation of these elements, accumulation of documents, their seriation, and the organization of comparative field, making it possible to classify, to form categories, to determine average, to fix norms. Hospitals of 18th century, in particular, were great laboratories for scripturary and documentary methods. The keeping of registers, their specification of modes of transcriptions from one to another, their circulation during visits, their comparison during regular meetings of doctors and administrators, the transmission of their data centralized in bodies, either a hospital or the central office of poorhouse. The accountancy of disease, cures, death at the level of hospital, a town, and even if a nation as a whole formed an integral part of process by which hospitals were subjected to a disciplinary regime. Among the fundamental conditions of a good medical discipline, in both sense of word, one must include the procedures of writing that made it possible to integrate individual data into cumulative system in such a way that they were not lost. So to arrange things that an individual could be located in a general register, and that controversially each datum of individual examination might affect the overall calculations. Thanks to whole apparatus of writing that accompanied it, the examination opened up two correlative possibilities. Firstly, the constitution of individuals as a describable, analyzable object, not in order to reduce him to specific features, as did the naturalist in the relation in living being, but in order to maintain him in his individual features, in his particular evolution, in his own aptitudes or abilities under the gates of permanent corpus of knowledge. And secondly, constitution of comparative system that made possible the measurement of overall phenomena, the description of groups, characterization of collective facts, the calculation of gaps between individuals, their distribution in a given population. These small techniques of notation, of registration, of constituting files, of arranging facts in columns and tables that are so familiar to us now were the decisive importance in the epistemological thought of series of individuals. One is no doubt right to pose the Aristotelian problem: is the science of individual possible and legitimate? Great problem needs great solutions, perhaps, but there is a small historical problem of emergence toward the end of the 18th century, what might generally be termed clinical science, the problem of entry individual into the field of knowledge, and problem of entry individual description, of the cross-examination of anamnesis, of the file into general functioning of scientific discourse. To this simple question of fact, one must no doubt give an answer lacking in the nobility. One should look into these procedures of writing and registration. One should look into the mechanism of examination, into the formation of mechanism of discipline, and of a new type of power, our bodies. Is this a birth of science of man? It is probably to be found in those ignoble archives where a modern play of coercion or bodies, gestures, and behaviors has its beginning. 3. Examination, surrounded by all its documentary techniques, make each individual a case which at once in the same time constitutes an object for a branch of knowledge and a hold for a branch of power. Case is no longer as an casuistry of jurisprudence, a set of circumstances defining an act capable of modifying an application of rule. It is individual as he may be described, judged, measured, compared with others in this very individuality. And it is also individual who has to be trained or corrected, classified, normalized, excluded. For a long time, ordinary individuality, the everyday individuality of everybody, remained below the threshold of description. To be looked at, observed, described in detail, followed from day to day by an uninterrupted writing was a privilege. The chronicle of a man, the account of his life, his historiography, written as he lived out his life, formed part of rituals of his power. The disciplinary method reversed this relation, lowered a threshold of desirable, describable individuality, and made of this description a means of control and a method of domination. It is no longer a monument for future memory, but a document for possibly use. And this new describability, it is also more marked in that disciplinary framework is a strict one. A child, the patient, madman, prisoner were to become with increasing ease of 18th century and according to curve which is that of merchants of discipline, the object of individual description and biographical accounts. This turning of real life into writing is no longer a procedure of heroization, it functions as a procedure of objectification and subjection. The carefully collected life of mental patients or delinquents belongs, as the chronicle of kings or adventures of great popular bandits, to a certain political function of writing, but in a quite different technique of power. The examination is a mixed at once ritual and scientific of individual difference as a pinning down of each individual in his own particularity, clearly indicates the appearance of new modality of power in which each individual receives as his status his own individuality and which he is linked by his status by features. The measurement gaps marks that characterize him and make him a case. Finally, the examination is the center of procedure that constitutes the individual as an effect of power, object of power, as effect in the object of knowledge. It is examination which, by combining hierarchical surveillance and normalizing judgment, assures the great disciplinary function of distribution and classification, maximum extraction of forces and time, continuous genetic accumulations, optimum combination of aptitudes, and thereby fabrication of cellular, organic, genetic, and combinatory individuality. With it are ritualized those disciplines that may be characterized in the word by saying that they are a modality of power which individual difference is relevant. The disciplines mark the moment when reversal of political access for individualization, as one might call it, takes place. In certain societies, of which a feudal regime is only one example, it may be said that individualization is greatest where sovereignty is exercised and in the higher echelon of power. The more one possesses power of privilege, more one is marked as an individual by ritual, written account, or visual reproduction. The name and genealogy that situate within a kinship group, the performance of deed of demonstrates prior strength and which are immortalized in literary account. Ceremonies that mark the power relation in their very ordering monuments or donations that bring survival after death. Ostentation and excess of expenditure, multiple intersecting links of allegiance and suzerainty, all these are procedures of an ascending individualization. In a disciplinary regime, on the other hand, individualization is descending as a power becomes more autonomous or more functional. Those on whom it is exercised tend to be more strongly individualized. It is exercised by surveillance rather than ceremonies, by observation rather than commemorative accounts, by comparative measures that have the norm as reference rather than genealogies giving ancestors as points of reference, by gaps rather than by deeds. In a system of discipline, child is more individualized than the adult, a patient more than a healthy man, madman and delinquent more than a normal and non-delinquent. In each case, it is toward the first of these parts that all individualizing mechanisms are turned in our civilization. When one wishes to individualize the healthy, normal, and law-abiding adult, it is always by asking him how much the child has in him. Sacred madness lies within him, what fundamental crisis he has dreamed of committing. All the science analysts practice employing root psycho have their origin in this historical reversal of procedures for individualization. The moment that saw a transition from historical ritual mechanism for formation of individuality, scientific or disciplinary mechanism when normal took over from ancestral, and measurement from status, thus substituting for individuality of memorable man that of calculable man. That moment when the science of man become possible is moment when a new technology of power and new political autonomy of body were implemented. and from early middle age to present day in adventure is an account of individuality, passage from the epic to novel, from the noble deed to sacred singularity, from long exils to internal search for childhood, from combats to fantasies. It is inscribed the formation of disciplinary society. The adventure of our childhood no longer finds expression. Le Bon Petit Henri, but in Misfortune's Little Hands and Romance of the Rose is written by today Mary Barnes in place of Lancelot. We have Judge Schreiber. It is often said that the model of society that has individual as its continuant element is borrowed from the abstract juridical forms of contract and exchange. Mercantile society, according to this view, is presented as a contractual association of isolated juridical subjects. Perhaps, indeed, political theory of 17th and 18th century often seems to follow this scheme, but it would not be forgotten that there existed at the same period a technique of constituting individuals as correlative elements of power and knowledge. The individual is no doubt the fiction's atom and ideological representation society, but he is also a reality fabricated by his specific technology of power that I have called discipline. I must cease once and for all describe an effect of power a negative term. It's excluded, it represses, it censors, it abstracts, it masks, it conceals. In fact, power produces reality, it produces demands for objects and rituals or truth. Individual and knowledge that may be gained of him belong to his production. It is not somewhat excessive to derive such power from petty machination of discipline. How could they achieve effect of such scope?